When is the last time you asked for the hardest job? It's an interesting way to love them and lead them. We're talking with Rob Bridges, president of Cathedral High School in Indianapolis, because he's doing hard things. Hey, he's our guest on this episode of the Educators Among Us podcast.
Welcome to the Educators Among Us podcast, where we share motivational messages and inspiring stories for and about educators. Your host, Scott Barron, is author of the critically acclaimed book, Love 'Em and Lead 'Em, and provides powerful insights and wisdom for those who heed the call to teach, coach, lead, and serve at all levels of education.
This is Scott Barron, and I'm so honored to be your host for the Educators Among Us podcast. We get to provide inspiration, perspective, and hopefully a little joy for those who serve in all levels of education, because it takes all kinds. And people who really love the work. Sometimes it's May, and sometimes it's easy this time of year to kind of get burned out. And that's okay. I mean, it can happen, but we can't get burned out. We got to finish. We got to finish strong. And so there's a lot of stories out there. We get a chance to work with schools and school leaders from all across the world, and we get to hear stories that are like, oh, that's cool. I mean, that totally is what this is all about. And today I'm joined by Rob Bridges, and Rob he's one of those stories. It's a lot of fun to be able to partner with Rob and his leadership at Cathedral School there in Indianapolis, and what he's doing to not just run a school, but to lead a school through that journey to excellence. And that's not for the faint of heart. Anyone who's done it knows that it requires a lot of courage and stamina and perseverance and willing, kind of a little bit of a fight. And that's something that I love about Rob, is he brings that to the table because he loves and leads educators. And that's just a joy. And so, Rob, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day, especially here in May, to be a part of this conversation together.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me, Scott.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we always start our conversations like this with a very important question, and that is, who was an educator who significantly impacted your life, and why? You can have more than one if you insist, but someone who really impacted your life, and why?
Yeah, I had no idea what I was going to do with my life besides have fun, and certainly not being a teacher. But looking back on it, once I became a teacher, it was obvious it was a gentleman named Mr. Gorney. Bill Gorney was my 7th grade teacher in Traverse City, Michigan, Immaculate Conception K through 8 school. And Mr. Gorney, he was cool but also corny. I remember he was the first one that really had us read a real book, a To Kill a Mockingbird, and he was on his feet the entire time. We read along with him. I remember him showing us what prisms were and how the light would come and turn into all the different lights of the spectrum, and he just made everything engaging. He never sat down. He played basketball with us, and in northern Michigan, that means playing on top of the snow hills. That means it was easier to dunk when the rim was at this level, but everybody else could tackle you with your snowsuit. But he was right there with us. And so, gosh, that was probably in the mid-'70s. I ended up being principal of that school in 2000. And I had people tell me, you have the best job in town, Rob, because you get to play with kids all day. And they were kind of right. I did play most of the time. But it was so joyful. And to be there full circle, I realized in the same place, it was Bill Gorney who really inspired me.
That's awesome. Well, what I love about your story, of course, is that you have provided and worked as an educator in a wide range of schools. Very few people have covered almost the full gamut, and you have had a chance to serve in public education, in private education, and faith-based schools, and a variety of different urban and rural programs. And so I just love the fact that your broad range and the experience that you bring to the table is vital, and it makes a big difference. There's one of the things we know about wisdom, right, is some wisdom only comes with gray hair. right? Now there are people who have gray hair who still lack that wisdom. So it's not by default, right? But you and I both know some people who kind of gotten that age, and it's like, you haven't figured that out by now. Okay, But the question for you is, how did you first get started? What was that impetus? Where did you start? And it was sort of what has your journey been like as an educator?
Yeah, back in the 80s, that was the 1980s, for those keeping score at home. I joined the Peace Corps. I always wanted to be in the Peace Corps. I don't know why. I was born in Detroit, but raised in northern Michigan. Not a lot of diversity there. I knew there was more out there. And really, Scott, I remember watching Roots. Like, I think they said half of the televisions in the United States were tuned into that 7-night miniseries, Alex Haley's Roots miniseries. And it impacted me so strongly. And honestly, Bo Bridges, Jeff Bridges, Lloyd Bridges was one of the worst guys in that, one of the worst guys. And I was embarrassed because our last name is Bridges. I remember calling as a sophomore on a payphone, the 1-800 number, and they told me I was too young. I was a sophomore in high school. So once I got out of college and got my degree, I moved to Washington, D.C., managed a record store for my friend, and I went to the Peace Corps office there. And they hired me to be a chief video officer for the Caribbean Association for the Mentally Retarded. That's what they called it then. And I was based in St. Lucia, but got to live in all the Lesser Antilles Islands, played basketball a lot, spent a lot of time in the sun. But mostly I had a video camera, and I recorded what happened in schools for the deaf and the blind, worked a lot with Special Olympics. And I came home after 3 years of doing that, which was fantastic. And I only got one job offer, and that was for CNN for $11,000 a year. And I remember asking the lady if you could get raises, and she said, well, after year one, if you're real good, and year two, you can go to 11.5. And with her accent, and I said, 11.5? I said, I think they gave us that in the Peace Corps. So I decided to look the other way. My dad told me I never really talked about the TV production. I talked about the kids. And so I moved in with a friend in New Jersey, and his sister was working at a kind of like a prison school for young kids, 8 to 12-year-old wards of the court, Somerset Hills School. It was a prison school. And I worked the night shift, and then eventually they needed someone in the teacher block, so I became a teacher without ever having taken an education class, by the way. But then I applied for a Peace Corps fellowship at Columbia Teachers College in New York City. So I got that, and they placed us, there were 35 of us, they placed us at different public schools in New York City. So I taught self-contained fifth and sixth graders with severe emotional impairments. And that was during the day. Then at night, I went uptown and for 2 years got my blue ribbon master's from Columbia Teachers College. So, and I loved it. I was in a school with 0 white people. It was the 3rd Chinese, the 3rd African American, the 3rd Latino, Dominican, and Puerto Rican. And I remember taking the kids down to the Canyon of Heroes to see Nelson Mandela. I had a kid on my shoulders. I remember taking kids home on the subway and reading White Fang to them. And these are 6th graders who were non-readers. But I had these kids next to me reading that particular book. But it was so rewarding that at the end of 2 years, the Parents Association asked me to stay on and be the principal. Never taken a principal's class either. But they could tell that I engaged the kids and I loved what I did. So the union, no offense to unions, I know they look out for teachers, but the union got wind of this petition for me to be principal. And they told me that I could not be a principal in New York City for the near future or ever because I was a white male, and they just weren't hiring white guys to be principals. This is in the year 1990. So I went back to Michigan, got hired. I called the 5 biggest school districts and I asked for their hardest job. That's what I said. I said, I'd like your hardest job. I've got a master's in special ed and I've worked in the Peace Corps. I want your toughest job. So people kind of paused and they all offered me jobs. I ended up going to Grand Rapids and ended up working at Central High School, the oldest high school in the state of Michigan. Ended up being the varsity basketball coach too. About half of my kids had parole officers instead of parents. So that was kind of mission work too, but I loved it. Did that for 5 years. And then ended up going back overseas. A lot of Peace Corps volunteers would get their master's and then go back overseas for a well-paid job. And I had a choice of jobs there too, and ended up choosing the American school, a Scuola Americana in Rio de Janeiro. and most populous Catholic country in the world. So I thought the odds were good. Maybe I'd find my wife there, which is exactly what happened. And I worked there for 5 years, had the whole school come to our wedding. I had a priest friend who married us in Portuguese and English. And then in 2000, I moved back to Immaculate Conception. That's back to the story with Bill Gorney, elementary principal, Traverse City Immaculate Conception. And then after 1 year, they told me I had to go to the high school and bring the juice back to the high school because they had no juice. They had really not much going on, enrollment falling, teachers mildly happy. So that started my journey 25 years ago being a Catholic school administrator.
So how many times do you have someone come in and apply for a position at your school and say, give me the toughest job you have?
Never.
Right.
Never.
That's what I love about you is that you have that courage and even that boldness to say, let me have it. I got it. It's like that guy on the basketball team that says, I'll cover their best player. Give me the hardest one. I don't care who he is, right?
I saw Dennis Rodman on my birthday in 1990 beg Coach Daly that he wanted to guard Patrick Ewing. He was giving up 5 inches or more. He begged him. For the last 3 minutes, he guarded Ewing. Ewing didn't score. Pistons won. Yeah. But there's that toughest job TV show, I think. It's on one of the channels, The Toughest Job, and it's like sanitation guys or plumbers or whatever. I don't mind the toughest job.
Yeah, I love that you have that spirit about you. So, what did you bring forward from what you learned in the Peace Corps? What are you using or have you used as a part of education leadership?
To be with the kids, and it kind of reminds me of St. John Bosco, who had the toughest kids on the streets of Turin, and he took in the toughest kids. And he said, you have to love them before you can teach them. But once you love them and once they know you love them, they'll do anything for you, anything. And that's called the Bosco method. That's actually a thing, the Bosco method of teaching. Don't necessarily have to throw kids against the walls, although maybe you have to break up fights sometimes. But more importantly, get right to their hearts. You get on their level. You play hoops with them. You go for a walk with them. You teach them how to read. But once they know, and I think kids are great at knowing if a teacher is a fraud or the real deal. The kids know before the adults do. Kids can tell if they're reading from a script or just going from. But if you're teaching from your heart, kids know. They know. I think they know right away.
So what do you love most about this? Because you and I both know this thing of being an educator. For the ones who are the best, this is a calling. It's not just a job. They're not just doing it for the paycheck. Obviously they are, and we have to do this for a living. But they also have a higher purpose in what they're doing, right? So, how would you describe that? What is it that you love most about this calling?
Well, whether it's a public school in New York City or a international school for very wealthy in Rio de Janeiro, or anywhere else I've been, every school has a mission. Whether they have a written, published mission statement, and every school has something that they really feel very strongly about. And I love every mission I've ever had for every school, but my mind's grown, and so now to find a Holy Cross school founded, right after the French Revolution, where they talk about hearts and minds and putting people from the opposite ends of socioeconomic strata together. I mean, it blows my mind that you could even do that. But Holy Cross School and other schools do that too. But I love our mission, educating the heart and the mind, educating the wealthy and the not so wealthy, the really smart and the not smart at all of them. And that's a Catholic school thing, but it's also a lot of other schools do that too and just don't call it that.
Having the mission, and that's one of the things we've been working on together, right? In our work with school growth has been, it's easy to say excellence on the website. It's easy to put it in the mission statement and even to other marketing materials, but to be authentically excellent, right? To really have a validation that's demonstrated that, we may have some external signs like enrollment or other things or buildings that are really, they're beautiful, but we're as beautiful on the inside as we are on the outside, right? Because you can walk into some schools and they don't even like each other, right? There's a tension, there's a language that they use, and that's one of the things that I really respect about what you've accomplished there and continue to build on. Because obviously it's an infinite journey, this one to excellence. but having a team and then a commitment to that journey and building those disciplines that are those leadership disciplines around people, around thinking, and around action. You're doing it, and it's hard to find that, and that's one of the things I think it's been a real joy to work with you in that. So, can you for a moment talk about that process and what it's been like these last few years to navigate that?
Well, when you talk to our team about finding our superstars, and we haggled a little bit, but it wasn't that hard. We came up with our top 20 pretty easily, and then you asked us to write down their descriptions of them, their qualities of them. And then you said, hey, wouldn't it be great if your whole school was full of people like that? And we all said, yeah, that's funny. That'll never happen. Because you've always got that teacher who we just know is grumpy, but they're an above average or maybe even a great teacher, but they're not very nice. But that's okay. And you made sure to tell us that's not okay. I just had someone quote you to me this morning about whether it's okay for a person to be here or not, and holding me to my words. So when we come out and say, you have to be kind, you have to be collaborative, you have to have joy. I look at the picture of our former Pope, Pope Francis. He talked about this term he used, and in translation it came out as pickle face, but basically he said, you can't have Lent all the time. Or if you're going to talk about our faith, you have to have joy. And if you don't have joy, you're not doing it right. So joy is our big thing. Joy and kindness, collaborative, innovative, really working together, being engaged and engaging, and also, by the way, being great at your job. And yes, you can do these things. And yeah, there are people out there that are looking for jobs right out of college that fit these descriptions. We find 5 of them every year. So we've been flipping our staff. We respect those who have been here for decades. Some of them are still joyful and kind, collaborative, all those things. But if they're not, or even if they're a brand new teacher and they don't fit that, then they can work in a school, but they can't work at this school.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's interesting. You're very talented, or even you could call them great teachers, coaches, staff, in all roles. Who do they want to work with? Great teachers, right? They want to work with people who have that joy. They want to work with people who respect the calling, who aren't just showing up, sort of some in education we would call this bell to bell, right? They're not just kind of doing the minimum, but they're in it for the bigger picture. They have an ability to think systemically. They understand the consequences of their decisions, but they want to work with people who make them better, who will share information and will actually, and it sounds kind of weird, but will hold them accountable in love, certainly, right? Because we all know that you can hold accountability and be sort of brutal with it, or you can do it in a way that's constructive and builds people up, but still holds the line, right? And that's a sort of in the areas that you're talking about when we're building the team, we're choosing the people, right? Educators, especially education leaders, we often see them make decisions out of fear, right? Who else am I going to find? What about, this person's so connected or ... right? Yeah, but who's the right person? Who's the person who aligns with our mission? Like you said, they get the mission. They want the mission. They have the ability to do the mission, and they bring the other habits. Because that's what you're talking. I mean, smiling is a habit. It's something that you can either be intentional about or not. We have one head of school that we sometimes will I have to tweet or text him and say, hey, are you smiling? Because he has a demeanor that's just not inclined to that because of some of his background. But you're right. There are some people who just they've forgotten the right habits, and it's hard to teach adults habits.
Yeah. So we've been very systematic with using this language. And I hear it. I hear people bringing it back to me. It's just repeated and repeated. It's about a third year of this. I had a veteran teacher, one of those guys with the silver/gray hair, and he popped by my office first week of school last year and said, hey, Rob, I looked up and down the hall, and there's all these new, young, joyful, kind teachers. Are you guys doing that on purpose? And I said, we are. And you can tell it's kind of
obvious. It shows. That's right. It definitely shows. So if you had a chance to go back, Rob, let's say you could talk to, it's 2025, right? If you could go back to the 2000 version of you, what would you tell yourself? What's the biggest tip that you would give yourself?
Listening is underrated. Listening and taking notes is so underrated. Yeah, and there's too much that happens in a school to keep it in your head, but taking the time to listen, especially to the most important ones in our school. I mean, we love the kids, but it's like for us, it's the educators. We got to make sure that we're taking care of them. And so just taking the, I discovered I take notes on my phone with a sticky note, but like I just take one walk for 15 minutes, and the teacher has a dog they had to put down. Another one has to, father-in-law is really sick and they're going to have to put him in a home. Third one had like a foot problem. Fourth one had something wrong with their car. Not huge things, but for each one of them at that time, it was an overriding thing. So I made a note of those things, and I checked back with them about those very same things. And I didn't do that when I was younger. I didn't. Maybe I'd remember, but I didn't want to take chances with, like I tried these four, and it was so amazing to see their reaction to me. You remember that? How do you remember that? You got a lot going on. I said, but you mean a lot to me. And so so I started doing that as a habit. I'm not perfect at it, but I'm trying more every day just to take notes and to listen.
Right. A powerful message. And I think you're spot on with that. Because part of that is also taking those notes so that we can follow up, right? That's one of the things I think that distinguishes your leadership and others that we have a chance to coach and pour into is you got to have that follow up and that follow through. And that does require taking notes. You're not going to be able to keep everything in your head. There are a few. I'm not one of those that remembers all the details. Tammy tends to remember a lot of the things that I said. She remembers those details really well. But there's a habit, right, of then following up with people and taking care of those little notes and things. And so I really appreciate where you're coming from there. I've actually gotten some feedback. This past week we shared a weekly encouragement on pain, and I got some very interesting notes from people who talked about that. I'm going through a lot of pain right now. We're going through some things that in my personal life or in our school, and man, I cannot tell you how much we're processing that, and that really hit home for us. And I think that is something I think you and I have in our work together. We know that April and May. If you're ever going to pick a time to pray for educators, that's your month. I mean, pick those 2 months and you can't miss because there's always stuff going on, and we have to figure out how to sustain our energy through that. And of course, we're trying to make sure our educators are also, hey, don't stop now. You got to finish. You got to run through whether you use a baseball analogy, you got to run through the base, or you got to run through the end zone, football, whatever it is, you got to finish, right? And it may hurt. And sometimes you have to use that pain as the feedback loop that says, okay, I got to push through. I got to do it anyway, right? And so that's something that we want to continue to encourage the educators that are listening to our podcast now. Don't give up. And if you need help, then find the help, because there's people out there who care about you and want to be a part of your journey, want to pray with you and just be a part of encouraging you and finishing strong, and even in your own personal growth as well. Rob, as you think through sort of your plans coming up, what are some of the professional development things that you're working on in your own personal growth plan?
Well, I'm reading and I'm trying to follow through with my reading. I get about a new book every week, and I like to read them. I like to listen to them too on the Audible. But,
and he's not kidding, by the way. He really does this. Some people buy the books, you walk in, and you can tell that the book doesn't even have a crease in the spine. Right? But Rob's are all marked up. You can actually, his reading is an exercise for him. It's not just perusing words.
Well, I read there was a study that if a household had 500 books in the house, the kids had that much more chance of whatever success. And so I said to my wife, see, that's why we have all these books right there. And you don't even have to read them, just having them in the house. It helps if you read them. But definitely reading, We have some property up north of us here. We're going to try to make sure to have some time, have some long weekends in June and July. I think it's real important. Breathe some good air, get in some sandals, and then model that for other members of my team too. Of all the things that I've encouraged our people to do since I came, this is my 9th year here, it's work-life balance, that term. Right away, a couple teachers said they copied my email and taped it right next to their bed so they'd remember. It's kind of like they had to be told that it's okay to have work-life balance. It's not a competition to log the most hours here. And especially in the summer, when you can get away, you must get away. Because we're going to need your energy when you come back, and you won't be any good to us or your students if you come back and you're not ready, refreshed, and recharged. But we also don't want your families to resent us because you're always here. You have to go home. I mean,
That's right.
I guess you don't have to go home. You can go anywhere you want, but we'd love it if you were balancing work
Please
and
go home.
Yeah, please. And there's a couple that I know it's never going to change, and I've let that be, but the message has definitely resonated that you've got to have balance. That looks different for a 25-year-old and a 55-year-old for sure. So everybody finds their own, but we model it. I think it's important to model it.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Rob. I mean, thank you for being a model of excellence and modeling a love. I mean, that's our big theme, right? It's loving and leading educators, and we're very thankful for your commitment to that because you get it. That our calling in education leadership absolutely is to provide the best environment for educators to thrive, and that means that they're using their gifts, they're doing this in a way where there is some. There is at least some form of balance. I don't know if there's ever sort of a true balance. I think it's just kind of figuring out, every person has to figure out sort of their own strategies around how they use time and how they prioritize. But certainly there is an environment that does create the joy, and I love the way that you do that, and you try to make sure that our leadership team is committed to that we're providing bandwidth, for time and to read and to study and to pray and to just to live, right? Because life is short, and so being able to have people around you that they make each other better and they pour into each other, and it's just it's an exciting team. And that's a word that is kind of used sometimes flippantly. Mm-hmm. Teams are different, but when people really come together as a team, there's a beautiful element to that. There's such an ability to make each other better and to enhance the journey for everybody. And so, again, I really appreciate your dedication to the craft of being a leader of educators. Hey, listen, we got a lot of people who listen to this podcast from all around the world, and it's an honor to be a part of your journey as you try to grow as an educator and figure it out. We're in an era that is going to require a lot of change for educators, and we typically are not big fans of change, right? So Rob and the rest of the folks that are a part of our network are trying to figure that out. I mean, we're trying to learn and grow and really have that growth mindset that's way easier to talk about than to actually do. But we're on that journey together, and because we get to make a difference in a lot of people's lives. And that's the exciting part of recognizing, hey, there are some educators among us, and they're really good at what they do. They make a big, big difference in the lives of people for generations. And so we're thankful for people like Rob, for sure.
Yeah,
thanks for joining us. And yeah.
I'd be remiss if I didn't say this school, Cathedral High School, is full of scores of outstanding educators who are sprinting with zeal and joy through the finish line right now. Mm-hmm. I know they are. So it's a pleasure for me to be here. It's a pleasure for me to be a part of your network and be your colleague. So I thank you for that.
Thank you for that. Absolutely. All right. Well, listen, remember, love them and lead them, my friend. This is Scott.
Thank you for joining us for the Educators Among Us podcast and for your courageous commitment to this noble calling. We get you and the challenges of this work. To stay connected with this community, be sure to subscribe to our podcast and weekly encouragement at educatorsamongus.com.